Hi Long Range Honey. Today we're going to be talking about what is the best universal cartridge for all big game animals. Now this is a never-ending discussion, and we hear about it all the time. There's thousands of magazine articles, there's videos on it. Everybody talks about this cartridge and that, and what caliber is required for this. Now, what does everybody say? And it's true, mind you, that a larger cartridge like this 300 Win Mag is going to have more power, more energy, and be deadlier than this 308 right here. Let's see two temporary wound cavities on our gel tests that show a Magnum cartridge in two different simulated whitetail deer. One with an A-tip, one with an ELD match. Now those Magnums, they're impressive, aren't they? Yes, they are. Now let's look at the 308 with both of those types of bullets too. The ELD match and the A-tip. Now you can see how much smaller those cavities are. Are they still lethal? Yes, but you can definitely tell a difference between the Magnum and the 308 and why it is so much more effective as a cartridge. Had you going there for a second, didn't I? In fact, that's not true at all. One, there is no universal best cartridge out there because everybody's needs are different. Everybody has a different recoil sensitivity. Recoil, even in just different rifle weights and setups, is going to recoil differently. A wood stock versus a composite stock is going to give you different recoil pads, etc. And if you can't handle your recoil, you need to go with a smaller cartridge. Accuracy is everything. Shot placement is everything. And no Magnum cartridge is going to make up for a poor shot. So why not go with one, a cartridge that is small enough that you can handle, enjoy shooting, so you can train with it and place that round exactly where you want to go. But there's also other benefits. One, recovery time. The less recoil there is, the faster the recovery there is. So you can get back on that scope for not only a follow-up shot if you ever have to do that. With the right bullet, you don't have to, but just in case. And then also, it's easier to shoot. It's easier to shoot a less recoiling weapon and keep your fundamentals. And you don't develop a flinch. So you can train with it, master it, and be better in the field. Am I saying Magnums are bad? No, not at all. Obviously, I own Magnum. People overestimate it. Now, just to clear a couple things up, there's a difference between a cartridge and a caliber. A caliber is the diameter of the bullet. A cartridge is the individual cartridge. Now, 308, 30-06, and all the 300s are all 30 calibers. The individual ones are 30-06, 308, or 300 Win Mag. Those are cartridges. Just because a bullet is even lighter or it doesn't come out of a Magnum doesn't mean it's not going to be effective. Let's revisit real quick that first picture. Both of those are great cavities, right? Now the bottom one was done with a 300 Win Mag with a 230 grain A-tip bullet. Impact velocity of 2,500 feet per second. Now, the top one, that was done with a 168 grain ELD match out of a 308 with an impact velocity of 2320 feet per second. So 180 feet per second difference. So the 308 was very close to matching, a 230 grain bullet out of a 300 with a 168 grain bullet at 180 feet per second less. Now, this comparison would be even more drastic if we were using a poor hunting bullet like a core lock, which has probably the worst performance of any bullet out there, which I really don't understand why people think that it's a good bullet. I mean, now both the A-tips and the ELD match are in the top 5 bullets from field to controlled test results. So even seeing the difference between those as the top bullets will give you an idea of how much more drastic it could be. Now that second picture, now the top is the 300 Win Mag with the A-tip. So you can see the top and then the bottom, the 168 grain, it's a very similar size cavity. The difference is the A-tip out of the Magnum was an impact velocity of 1,800 feet per second. The 308 with the 168 grain match, ELD match, was an impact velocity of 1,370 feet per second. We have a difference of 430 feet per second difference in impact velocity, yet you're getting similar results. You don't need a Magnum cartridge, and think about that. With lower velocities, it's matching in terminal performance. If you are impacting at the same impact velocity, the ELD match is going to pull ahead. Out of all the bullets, of hunting bullets, match bullets that I've used in both the field and in testing, ELD match has come out on top. And we're talking about the top 5 bullets for terminal ballistics here. We're not talking about doing the worst. We're talking about so far of our external ballistics, of its accuracy, flight path, wind resistance, everything, the ballistic coefficient, and then its terminal performance. We're talking about the top 5, and both of these are in there. Now we're talking about the top 5 here. So you have ELD match, AMAX, Burger hybrids, CRTMKs, and the Hornady A-tips. So number 1 and number 5 against each other in a Magnum and a non-Magnum, and we can match or beat results with a non-Magnum cartridge with less recoil. So do you really need a Magnum cartridge to put it down and get those types of results? Absolutely not. Now, if we look at the permanent wound cavities, you can see those are very similar sized permanent wound cavities. Now, the 300, does it have a little bit more of a permanent wound cavity? Yes, but it's also impacting at 2,500 feet per second versus just over 2,300 feet per second. Let's get to breaking down some myths here. And let's do what I love. That's called facts. Now, people have a misconception. They think because they believe something, that they have an opinion, that it constitutes fact. And that is completely false. The only way that your opinion is fact is if facts back it up. And as we say in this business, the bullet doesn't lie. You can say whatever you want, but end of the day, results of the bullet doesn't lie. Now, you are asking yourself 2 things right now. Jared, videotape that magnificent beard more, and what the heck is this chart? Now, you can see I have black sections and I have green sections. Ignore this beautiful artwork right here. Well, at least for the moment. I have numbers in black, I have numbers in green, and then I have abbreviations. Now, what does that mean? These are 2 animal comparisons when we talk terminal ballistics, and I've talked about it before. Weight is irrelevant. It has no factor. You're not shooting an 800-pound animal or a 200-pound animal. You're shooting a section of that. And your depth of penetration, impact resistance, etc., anatomy, that's what matters, not how much an animal weighs. This top one, GB, we have 16 inches of black here. We we have 4 inches of green. Now, what does that mean? This green is the depth of penetration to the vitals. The black is the vital depth. Now, contrary to popular belief, you do not need a pass-through. People have the general misconception that you have to have a pass-through. And what this comes from is one, archery. When I'm archery hunting, I want a pass-through. I want 2 holes for blood because arrows kill only by blood loss. Bullets kill by blood loss also, but you can also achieve hydraulic shock and hydrostatic shock, causing internal damage. Now, the other reason is people don't understand what they're doing. It's bullets. They use a poor bullet or get poor shot placement, and they end up having to track that animal instead of it dropping or going a very short distance and dropping. And so I just had a guy recently actually said he shot it with a burger. It dropped dead on the spot, but there wasn't an exit at close range. Well, that's not uncommon. And he's like, well, the bullet failed. It didn't do me any good. If I had had to track it, well, here's the thing. It didn't fail. That bullet performed perfectly. That bullet hit and dumped the maximum amount of potential energy into that chest cavity, killing it instantly. It never even moved besides dropping down. On that topic, guess what? That energy that it says on your ballistic calculator that you should have at that distance, it's only a potential. Now, energy is based directly on bullet performance. If that bullet does not perform, then you don't get that energy. Now, back to this chart. So you don't need full penetration. Down to my drawing, really this is what you got to defeat. Now, people don't realize that depth to the vitals isn't all solid. There is a gap in there between the inside of the ribs and those organs. A small one, but there's still a gap. So you have hide, you have meat, ribs, connective tissue, stuff like that. And then you have your vitals. And people, what they don't realize is, let's say you're going down here for a lung shot. You have your hide, your meat, your ribs, etc. And then you're going to hit those lungs. If you look at the anatomy of those lungs, it's kind of like a balloon. And so think of it, you have 2 lungs here across. You hit both of those, it's like popping 2 balloons. And those balloons are full of air. So there's a lot of dead space in there. Now, people tend to think there's a lot in the chest cavity, especially with lung shots and stuff, because when they open it up, that chest is full. Well, yeah, you do have arteries that run through, you have blood veins that run through, and you have your heart. So rupturing any of those is going to cause that chest cavity to fill with blood. But the blood wasn't like that before it was shot. Now, if you're a temporary wound cavity, or if you hit, heart and lungs, or whatever the case might be, it's going to fill. But realistically, the only organ in there that's going to give you any impact resistance like the meat outside is the heart. And it's not exactly huge. So, realistically, what you have to defeat is here to here, and then into the cavity. Now, what we're measuring is from here to this other wall. So that if it hits here, everything inside that energy is dumped. Now, it can still exit out the other side. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? No, but again, we want as much energy dump as possible. This top one, we have 16 inches of vital depth and 4 inches to the vitals. Now, down here, BB, we have 13 inches of vital depth and 3.5 of the green, meaning depth to the vitals. Now, these 2 animals are one of the most controversial ones that I hear all the time of size and weight and big bones. Yet, they are a very low impact resistant animal. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a grizzly bear. This is a black bear. The depth to those vitals is only 1/2 inch difference. The difference in the vital depths itself is only 3 inches. So, realistically, you're looking at a very, I mean, you can see it, it's a very small difference between the two. Now, contrary to popular belief, bears, just because an animal is dangerous does not mean that it's a high impact resistant animal. It doesn't mean it's armored, it's got thick hide, giant bones. Bears are really, and it's counterproductive for a lot of people. What they're going to do is they get a bullet that they think, oh, it's a hard target, so I want a hard constructed bullet that's going to hold together. Well, the problem is that bear, and anybody who has ever done taxidermy or skinned out a bear can tell you this, they're greasy. You have thin hide, it's really greasy, fatty meat, and that grease, I found, acts as almost like a lube. And so what happens is you're not meeting the necessary impact resistance for that bullet to expand, so it just pencils through without dumping any energy or very little. So people go, oh, well, it must be the cartridge. It must be that it's not big enough. So they go with a bigger cartridge with the same type of bullet, and they get the same result. The only difference is they get a little bit bigger wound cavity. And so they keep going up until they have these giant cartridges that they can barely handle because they want to drop it on the spot, which, newsflash, knockdown power doesn't exist. Knockdown power is something said by people who have no understanding of terminal performance or terminal ballistics. How you drop an animal is based off that bullet's construction and shot placement. That bullet performing and shutting down the central nervous system, the CNS. Going with a smaller cartridge with a good bullet, you can get better performance than that huge cartridge with that crappy bullet. And that bullet might be great for elephants in Africa, but you're not shooting at an elephant. So, I'm going to give you a couple examples right here. Some friends of mine who kill a lot of bears, and ever since switching to match bullets have had much better results. I hear all the time, well, inside, close range, I just don't want to worry about it. I want that big bullet. Well, this is at 20 yards with a 6.5 Creedmoor with a 147 grain ELD match. And it dropped dead on the spot. Now you can see it caused massive damage. And an exit hole big enough for him to stick his big thumb in. And he's got big hands, so that animal literally flopped over. You can tell that's a good sized bear. Now they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, how about video? And I got 2 of them for you. So let's watch what the ELD match does to 2 bears.
Dumped him.
That's pretty impressive, right? I've seen, and you can watch tons of hunting shows and YouTube, and you can see guys shoot 3.38 and hit a bear and it'll just run off and they got to go find it. Yet, with a small cartridge like a 308 and a 6.5 Creedmoor, those animals drop dead. Dead on the spot. So, you tell me which one really works better. I'm going to go with the better bullet that's going to actually expand on those lower impact velocity shots and give me good terminal performance. Because ultimately, that is what's going to kill. Now that we've covered bears, let's go to the probably biggest comparison that I get all the time, and it's one of the most ridiculous. And that is these two. Now, E and WD. We have 15 inches of vital depth, and we have 4 inches of depth to vitals. 10 inches of vital depth, 3 inches to the vitals. So an inch difference. In depth to the vitals, 5 inches of vital depth. Now, what animal could I possibly be talking about in these two situations? And everybody says the same thing. Well, that might work on a light-skinned 200-pound white-tailed deer, but it would not work on a 700-pound elk. Well, guess what? Elk and deer, they're not that much difference. You're talking an inch difference in depth to vital and you're talking about 5 inches more of vitals. Now you can see by these two side by side, there's not a whole lot of difference. That extra weight that people talk about, because weight's irrelevant, that weight is in length and height. It's not really much in width. Height difference, because I've measured this. I do my own taxidermy. I have stuff all over this place. The difference is only 1/8 of an inch. And as you can see by these two pictures, one was during an elk simulated shot and one was done with a whitetail shot. And those match what I've seen in the field through my own hunts and others. It just punches a hole. Those hides are not armored. They don't, people act as if you're shooting through this really dense, leather almost, and it doesn't get that way until it's tanned. But really, that in between, not the hide here, but that meat, bone, etc., is where you're getting your expansion before it hits inside here. As far as that goes, both with the bears and this, when you're talking bone difference, especially with the rib cage, we're not talking huge. We're talking a little bit thicker. Now, around it might be a little bit bigger, but if we're talking penetration-wise, we're talking very small. And a bullet going thousands of feet per second is going to blow straight through it. So, as far as this, you can see there's not a lot of difference here. People overestimate it. They blow it out of proportion, and then people think, oh, I have to get a Magnum cartridge in order to do it. And you really don't. To cover something real quick, we have covered these organs. You have your heart. But what is BS up here? And it doesn't stand for what you think. It stands for brainstem. Now, I have my beautiful leg over here. If you wanted to do a high shoulder shot, because I want to discuss this, because this is one way, not knockdown power, but how you can actually drop them on the spot, is hitting this high shoulder. And what this is going to do is it's going to hit the shoulder, it's going to break it. If it penetrates through both, it's going to break both shoulders. It's going to separate them from the body, because anatomy-wise, they're not attached by a ball socket like the rear legs. It's simply attached by meat, so you can cut it right off. So it's going to separate those from the body. It's going to destroy the lungs. It most likely, depending on your cavity size, is going to destroy the heart. And it's going to hit the brainstem, which is in the spine. Now, that is going to run up into the head and connect to the back of the brain. Now, when that animal does that, when that temporary wound cavity and that bullet severs that brainstem, and it cuts all signals to the brain, which is what snipers do. Police snipers, is they're going for what's called the fatal T, and they're trying to cut the brainstem to cut all signals to the brain and drop that person on the spot. This will effectively do the same thing. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is they'll see an animal shot, it drops on the spot, and they'll say, oh, well, it's still kicking, it's still alive, it's suffering. Well, it's really not. Snipers in Vietnam termed this the death dance. And what it is the signals to the brain have been cut. And the signals to your brain is what tells you to move. And so that animal, its body, all of a sudden the signals have been cut. And so that quote unquote kicking, or it looks like it's running in place, it's not that the animal's still alive. It's simply the muscles are spasming and it's just flopping around. How do I know this for sure? Well, one, because a few years ago I shot a deer. Shot it in the heart, 240 yards. It is the furthest an animal has ever made it for me. And that animal went a total of 30 yards with a match bullet. Shot it with the 308 168 grain, and it gave me the red carpet. It literally 10 feet of straight blood for 30 yards. Now, what it did when it got there is it flipped over, landed on its back with its antlers into the mud, and its legs were doing this kind of like synchronized swimming looking thing. Now, it did that for about 2 minutes, and when I got up there, there wasn't any blood at the location that it dropped. All the blood was out before it got there by a few feet. When I cut it open, there was nothing in there. That heart literally sprayed it everywhere. Yet the muscles were still spasming. So, just because it moves does not mean that it's not dead instantly. Now, as I've talked about in the field, and we have lots of evidence to support this, I've talked about opinions before. Your opinion isn't fact unless it's backed up. People will say, oh, well, you're just saying this because this is what you believe and it did it on some test, but it doesn't translate in the real world. Well, that's where all of our knowledge from this is. A controlled test is a controlled test, but if it doesn't validate in the real world, this is irrelevant. And we're kind of doing this backwards, and it's just simply to show people the difference between bullets. All of our data is in the field. The gel tests have been recent just to show you, especially the temporary wound cavity. What we've been studying is the field results from around the world. Now this is my older brother. He has been hunting with a 260 Remington for almost 20 years. He's hunted elk and even that bull moose. Now, he has never lost an animal and he's never had a track job. That moose dropped dead on the spot with a 130 grain bullet. Now you say, well, that's just lucky. Well, it's not really. A 260 is a 6.5 millimeter. And guess what? If you do your research, you'll find out in Russia and other areas, because North America is not the only place that has moose, but even in parts of Canada, the most common moose round worldwide is a 6.5 by 55. Seriously. That is the most common. More moose are killed with that than any other cartridge out there. It seems just here that we have this fascination with, big magnums. But are they required? Absolutely not. The bullet difference is what's going to do it. And that's what dictates it. So don't ever let somebody say that, oh, you can't do it with that. You really can. My buddy's daughter hunts with a 224 Valkyrie. With an 80 grain ELD match. She's never lost an animal. And guess what? Most of them drop dead on the spot. And she's killed multiples over 700, the farthest being 710 yards. And they are dead right there on the spot. Now, there's people that say, because it's basically a jacked up 223, oh, well, you can't do that. You can't do that. Well, yeah, you can. That bullet is above its minimum impact velocity, and it performs. This picture is one of her deer at 465 yards with that gun, with an 80 grain bullet. So you don't need anything massive. That is a huge understatement. And cartridges don't matter. They really don't. You can get really good results, and people don't understand either that even with the same bullet, if you take the same bullet in two different cartridges in calibers, so let's say you take a 6 millimeter against a 6.5, you can get similar wound cavities. One's going to be a little bit bigger. When we're talking difference in wound cavity, we're talking a matter of inch, 2 inches. We're not talking, this versus this. We're talking this versus this. So even in different calibers and cartridges, there's not a huge difference. What is most important is that you, as an individual, find what works best for you. A gun that you can handle, comfortably shoot, you don't have recoil sensitivity to and negatively affect your fundamentals of marksmanship. A gun that you can shoot a lot and practice with, and one that's effective in the field. Now, even a smaller cartridge with a great bullet, like the ELD match or a Sierra TMK or a Burger hybrid, placed in the right spot, will outperform all day long a Magnum cartridge with a good or poor bullet with poor shot placement. No Magnum will make up for a bad shot. Now, a perfect example of this. People don't like to talk about recoil sensitivity, and that's where we got to check our egos, because ultimately, either we can handle it or we can't. A lot of guys, I have to videotape them to show them. We had a guy come out to the range one time, and he was trying to do a 2-liter challenge at a grand. So 1,000 yards, he has 10 rounds to hit a 2-liter, he wins a patch. He had attempted it 4 times. He's running a custom .338 Lapua Magnum. Top of the line scope, top of the line custom gun. Everything component there was perfect. Except he couldn't shoot it. You couldn't tell him that. But watching him, he would flinch before he even pressed the trigger. He was already coming off target before he even pressed that trigger. And in 40 rounds, could not hit a 2-liter at 1,000 yards, which isn't that hard of a feat, to be honest. I mean, you should easily be able to do it within 10 rounds. Quite honestly, it shouldn't even take that. It should honestly take 5 rounds. But, you know, worst case scenario, wind, you're not that experienced, whatever the case might be. But when you're running top of the line equipment like that and everything's set up perfect, there's no excuse except for you. And watching him, even showing this guy how he did it, he still wouldn't change or admit it. So don't let your ego be the downfall of you, or have your ego insult somebody else for using a smaller cartridge just because you can't admit that you're wrong. People don't understand why they're actually recommended, and it's not because the efficiency of that cartridge. Guides recommend the 300 Win-Matic for elk because of clients. They're trying to prevent wounded animals by trying to have a larger cartridge, which will give you a little bit larger cavity and therefore a little bit more wiggle room on shot placement. Because they get clients all the time that want to blame them. They come out, they can't shoot, they end up wounding an animal or missing, and then they blame the guide because it's never their fault, when in reality it is. But that is why the magnums are recommended. It has nothing to do with it's the minimum cartridge or size to kill that animal. It has nothing to do with it all. It's just a simple way to try to prevent wounded animals. And people have a misconception even on energy with that. You know, people are stuck in the past. I hear all the time, 2,200 feet per second and 2,000 foot-pounds of energy. That's what you require to kill. Well, that's not true at all. In fact, that's far from true. Where that comes from is standard hunting bullets, especially back in the day, their minimum impact velocity was 2,200 feet per second. If you look at those cartridges, at 2,200 feet per second, a lot of them have around 2,000 foot-pounds of energy potential. And so people look at that and didn't understand that it's really based off that minimum impact velocity, and they say, oh, well, it's the foot-pounds of energy. This is what you need. When in reality, you don't. You don't need that much. Even at the lowest bullet that I know of, which is the ELD match at 1,300 feet per second minimum impact velocity, you still have more than enough energy to kill that animal and shut it down, dropping it dead on the spot. And that's proven in the field. I hope this has helped you. I hope it's educated you a little. You know, these magazine articles and everything, they drive me nuts because it's the same rhetoric and it's just bad information being spread. Pick wisely. Check the ego. You don't need something huge. You just need a good bullet, and you need to practice, practice, practice. Everybody, be safe out there. Happy hunting.
Not that hard, people.
Hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video, and happy hunting.